لنا أمورنا واستر عيوبنا اللهم اجعل لنا من كل ضيق مخرجا ومن كل هم فرجا واجعل لنا من بعد العسر يسرا بارك اللهم لنا في أعمالنا وفي أعمالنا وفي أرزاقنا وفي أهلنا وذوينا وأحبابنا اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما واجعل علمنا حجة لنا لا علينا اللهم أخرجنا من ظلمات الوهم إلى نور الفهم وأكرمنا بمعرفة العلم وزين أخلاقنا بالحلم يا أرحم الراحمين والله we call upon you and we pray to you and we beseech you we ask you by your names and attributes to bless our gathering and to make it sincerely for your sake. Oh Allah, we ask you to give us the best of knowledge and the best of action and the best of iman and the best of amal. We ask you, oh Allah, to inspire us to the best of dhikr and to the best of ihsan and to the best of this life and the best of the next. Fill our hearts with your abundant mercy, fill our homes with your abundant mercy, and make us of those who strive for your pleasure, who are steadfast upon the right path. Make the best of our days, the last of our days, the best of all days, the day we meet you and you're pleased with us. Allahumma ameen. Allahumma ameen. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Amma ba'd, it's my pleasure to be with you all for another Q&A session. And inshallah, we're going to try our best to address as many questions as we have. As Ustaz Na'il mentioned, the Google Voice number is up here. And I have Ustaz Muhammad Najib with me to field the questions and to add whatever he sees fit, inshallah. So we'll get started with our Q&A session, and then we'll also do some in-person questions if anyone wants to ask their question directly, inshallah. Do you have the microphone?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Jazakumullah khair, everybody, for coming. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you immensely. For those who may be here for the first time, this is one of the nights of the Community Hub. The Community Hub is a weekly session on Fridays after Salat al-Isha. And the purpose behind it and the goal behind it is to have families come together in a night of gaining knowledge as well as being able to have time to socialize. This specific night is Ask Me Anything, and of course, as we all know, it's important to search for answers and to seek out knowledge so that we make sure that what we're doing is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So with that, I'll start with the first question. What if your parents won't let you marry someone for no reason? What should you do?
So the question was, can you say it again?
So the question is from somebody who wants to know, they're interested in marrying somebody, but their parents seem to be standing in the way of that. So what should they do?
Yeah, so Bismillah. It's one of those big challenges that unfortunately many of our families face. I'm sure there's a reason. The question is it a good reason or is it a bad reason? But there's usually a reason that would inspire anyone to do what they do. But when it comes to a lot of the things relating to marriage, they're not clear black and whites. When it comes to families, relationships in general, they're realities that are imperfect, that we need to negotiate. And what that means is, yeah, there's an ideal, but most of the time we're not dealing with that ideal. We're dealing with the imperfections of people and the imperfections of relationships that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants me to maintain. When I'm talking about my mother, my father, my siblings, these are relationships that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in my life, and it's my responsibility to make sure that I do whatever I can to make sure they don't get severed. So this is how I would start by answering this question. Secondly, is it possible that a mother or a father could be very unreasonable? The answer is absolutely yes. Is it also possible that a son or daughter can be very unreasonable? The answer is absolutely yes. So sometimes, one side might think that the other side is doing something so wrong, not realizing that they perhaps may be in a ton of misconceptions themselves. That's another thing that I add to that question. And the reason why I'm saying this is, usually when it comes to relationships, when they get complicated, the best thing that a person could possibly decide is to involve third party, an impartial third party that has no benefit, no stake, no interest, no emotions attached to the issue, that could give good sound advice. So that's how I would answer this person who's asking this question. More than likely, your solution is in involving another party that can give you good advice on how to approach the situation. No two situations are the same. I've dealt with personally situations where the parents were completely unreasonable and their rejection of someone, a guy or a girl, was for completely un-Islamic reasons. I've dealt with that type of situation. That some parents, their issue with the guy was that he was religious. That was their issue. They don't want a religious guy for their daughter. You'd think that's very bizarre. How would someone think like that? But that happens. That happens. And other times, I realized also in many other situations where it might be a guy or girl that got their emotions attached to another human being through what? Through communications that they should have never had. They might have been messaging each other for months on end through Facebook or through some other type of social media, and they started getting infatuated with the other side, and they started seeing the other side, okay, هذا وبس ولا ما فيش. That I must get married to this person, and if I don't, I'm going to be a very unhappy and unpleasant person. I will never find happiness ever again in my life. Sometimes some people, they get in that type of mindset. And our Deen teaches us that love in a marriage is something that's built. In America, we're raised on this misconception, this facade that you have one true love, right? That you're supposed to feel a spark when you see someone. Khalas, if I don't feel a spark, and I've spoken to people who have this type of misconception, that if I don't feel a spark when I'm talking to this guy or to this girl, khalas, I'm going to go to the next one. And they might go through dozens of people like this because they're not feeling this spark, right? So again, this type of question is not one that you could address categorically. I'd be very wrong to tell you, do this or that if your parents reject a person for no reason at all. And the other reason why I'm saying this is because if I know that my sa'ada is not tied to a certain person, then what? If I need to assess the situation and all the factors. If there's too many obstacles in making this particular situation a success, then maybe it's not right for me. Maybe it's not right for me. It's okay for there to be a situation where, sometimes when it becomes such tunnel vision, you'll find a guy or a girl who's willing to sacrifice their family, sacrifice everything because they want someone, that they want a relationship to work out. And sometimes it could put them in a whole lot of problems and a very big mess. So that's some thoughts about this. Please reach out to someone, mention the specifics of your situation. You never know. If you're right and your parents are completely unreasonable, then maybe someone else getting involved can speak some sense into them. Wallahu alam.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. So to summarize, the Sheikh is saying every situation is different, but he calls upon both parties to be open-minded, whether it come from the children or the parents. And the main thing is to prioritize, the most important things. Perhaps you're not looking at the situation the way you should be, and you should try to involve a third party, because perhaps hearing things from somebody who's other than a parent, may actually have an effect on you. Jazakallah khair. I see a lot of questions coming in that can all be categorized, whether it's financial or social. So I'll try to keep the different categories together. The other question that came in, this is financial. Somebody's asking, a sister's asking, how do you encourage your husband to pray and set a good example for our children? I tried to tell him it's time to pray, tried to pray in front of him to encourage him, and tried to tell him let's pray together. But clearly she's having issues with that. So how can she get through to her husband?
Jazakumullah khair. So basically you're asking about how to give da'wah to a close family member. That's what the question comes back to. And what we learn from Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam is da'wah is an art form. And what that means is basically there's no clear equation. If you do it, it's going to make someone guided. If that was the case, then the Prophet ﷺ would have been able to guide Abu Talib, right? But Allah Azza wa Jal told him, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ. So there's no clear equation to make someone change their mind about something. But there are certain things that you could possibly do that might incentivize a person. There are certain things that you could do that might remove a person's barrier, the barriers in front of a person from accepting guidance. And that's what we could talk about, the art form of da'wah. There are certain no-nos when it comes to trying to inspire a person to the path of Allah. One of these no-nos is to make sure you don't pursue their flaws. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, he says, إِنَّكَ إِنِ اتَّبَعْتَ عَوْرَاتِ النَّاسِ أَفْسَدْتَهُمْ أَوْ كِدْتَ تُفْسِدَهُمْ. If you pursue the flaws of people, then you'll corrupt them, you'll ruin them. Perhaps one of the things I could possibly do in my relationship with my spouse, in this case it's a sister asking about her husband, is making sure that I gave them the security and confidence that they don't feel that I'm somehow speaking down to them. You do this, you never do that. You always forget this, you never apply that, and so on and so on. Basically speaking to how bad a person is. That's one of the worst things you could possibly do, is ittiba' al-awrat. Another thing that you could perhaps keep in mind in your relationship with your husband is to consider what Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam said. We mentioned Sayyidina Nuh. What was the verses I was talking about? The Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam, he said, إني دعوت قومي ليلا ونهارا. All right. ثم إني أعلنت لهم وأسررت لهم إسرارا فقلت استغفروا ربكم إنه كان غفارا. So Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam teaches us that he tried many different ways to try to get through to his people. And one of those most effective ways that we learn is to give da'wah privately. Is that when I'm going to speak to my family member, that I make sure that I preserve their ego and image in front of the children. That perhaps if I tell them it's time to pray, get up and pray with me, and I make it in front of the children, it might damage their ego, it might make them feel a sense of insecurity. That's something else to keep in mind, to do it privately. And another thing is to focus on what the Prophet ﷺ was taught to focus on in the very early days of da'wah. That's the qalb, the heart. Maybe what this person needs isn't an invitation to pray. Maybe this person needs a discussion about iman, a discussion about the importance of spirituality, and a discussion maybe about how a relationship with Allah might help deal with stress in life. Something that might trigger this person's interest that's relating to the heart. And maybe that might lead to interest in other things. So maybe if you tell someone, pray, it's time to pray. Why aren't you praying? You need to set a good example for our kids. Kada, 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 kada. Maybe all of this will fall on deaf ears. But maybe if you start speaking, how are you managing your stress at work? I found that when I get stressed out, if I do this, it gives me a sense of comfort. Speak about spiritual things that are the foundation of iman. You might find it translates to a whole lot of other things. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. So the Sheikh prefaced the answer by saying that we can't guide those who we love to guide. It's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we need to make sure that we stay steady upon dua in these matters, and also keep in mind that a lot of times maybe it's our approach. Although we might mean well, and although our argument might be convincing to our own selves, there's different keys to access people's hearts. And so perhaps approach it from a whole different angle. I'll stick with another social question. We have some spiritual ones coming in and a lot of financial questions. So another social question is, how to make mediation between two brothers who don't talk to each other? So what's your advice for somebody who wants to make sulh between two brothers?
How to make mediation between two brothers who don't talk to each other. So look, our relationship with people, is at varying degrees when it comes to birran sila. I have a relationship with my parents, with my siblings, with my aunts and uncles that is of a high shar'i priority that I must make sure that I never cut off. It's a very rare situation where it's okay for a sibling to cut off their sibling. That's not something that you could easily do. I'm just going to cut off my brother or my sister, my blood brother or my blood sister. I have another relationship with the believers that are in my vicinity, like my neighbors, like my co-workers, like the people who go with me to the masjid. That is another category. I have a third category which is with the general population of Muslims. Now, when it comes to those who are close to me, I should aspire to love for them what I love for myself. With the general population, there's something that the minimum requirement is, right? Salamat al-sadr lil-Muslimin. That I don't have ill will, that I don't want harm to come to another Muslim. That's something that is for all of us across the board. But now say if you have two brothers who don't talk to each other. Why don't they talk to each other? Is it because of qati'ah? Is it because of a conflict or a feud? Am I talking about blood brothers or am I talking about brothers in Islam? Or is it just because that they realize that their friendship isn't at the utmost priority? If it's that they don't realize, if they're not blood brothers and their friendship isn't of the highest priority to each other, they have different interests or they just don't feel compatible, then there's nothing that requires me to have a close relationship with every Muslim. I don't need to have a close relationship with every person, especially if I feel like that this relationship doesn't help me become a better person, right? But I must have salamat al-sadr. I can't go turn my back on my brother and have negative feelings towards him, want harm to come his way. No, I can't do that. How do you go about doing islah between them? One of the things you could possibly do is say that Fulan says nice things about you. Fulan always mentions the good things, even if Fulan doesn't actually do this. Because our Deen teaches us there are certain situations and scenarios where it's okay to lie. Where it's okay, and one of those things is for the purpose of islah. Whether it's between spouses or otherwise. If you want to sort of bring two hearts together and you start mentioning the good qualities of Fulan or how Fulan speaks about Fulan, this is one way to do that. If it's a conflict that you're speaking about more specifically, then maybe you could bring them to a third party and help them voice and vent their grievances and get it addressed, and then reconciliation can happen. That's how I would address it in a general sense, since I don't know specifics.
Jazakallah khair. I think that was pretty self-explanatory. The next question is also social. It's a pretty long question, and feel free to send in long questions. Just make sure that the actual question part of it is very clear. So to summarize, again, just for the sake of time, a brother was recently divorced after 18 years. A lot of people encouraged him to get married and to use different, I guess, Muslim dating apps, halal dating apps. He dated a Muslim woman and realized she didn't have Islamic values, and basically it didn't end up working out. He wants to marry a pious Muslim woman, and in general wants to get married to satisfy his parents, but he doesn't want to compromise his deen. So basically the gist of the question is, how do I find a righteous Muslim woman that won't compromise my Islamic principles? So how does he go about finding that person?
Yeah, Bismillah. I don't know, because this term might be used by people differently. I don't know what he meant by dating a Muslim sister.
So he, prior to that, he listed Muzmatch and Salam/Minder. So I don't know if that's what the avenue that he used to
but I don't know what's meant by dating. You know, in general, we don't have dating in our deen. We have interaction for the purpose of marriage, like you could say courting in English, it would be a better word. But that's really formal, and you know, it's driven towards the purpose of marriage, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
So let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say that it was that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing I would follow that up with is zawaj is tawfiq. Is marriage is something that is by Allah's guidance and Allah's will. And there's a beautiful line of poetry in Arabic that says, سيكون ما هو كائن في وقته وأخو الجهالة متعب محزون. Everything will happen at its appointed hour. But the people who cannot see the wisdom of Allah might exhaust themselves and cause themselves to fall into great grief and sorrow. I would urge the brother to consider that perhaps Allah's qadar and decree for you is written there, and you should believe in that, and it'll happen at the right time as long as I do my part and I do my due diligence. How can you do your due diligence? There are many, many opportunities through the ones that you mentioned and through others that are more conservative. I know some people, there's a stigma to searching for marriage through online sources because it could often lead to a lot of misunderstandings and false expectations. But there's even in our masjid here, there's a matrimonial service. So do your best through the halal avenues, and if I do my best, then I should leave the rest to qadar, and trust that it'll happen at the right time. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakallah khair. Another question which kind of ties into the answer you just gave. So let's say they went through the halal means to find somebody, and now they're at the point where they're getting to know each other. So the question is, what's your best advice for a couple to get to know each other, especially in the beginning stages of the relationship? So how do they go? What does that look like?
Yeah, first realize you're not a couple. You're a couple after engagement and after katb kitab. You're not a couple, and this is an important realization because a lot of people, they cross the bounds before it's time to cross. Too many situations I've dealt with where I found that the two don't even have khutuba, no engagement yet. Yet they're in constant communication, perhaps daily or multiple times a week. And what it ends up leading to is it leads to a lot of devastation. Emotions build up, and if something goes wrong, maybe perhaps certain lines might be crossed, and then it'll leave a very, very sour taste in the mouth. So we have three stages. We have prior, well, you could make it a fourth if you want. You have prior to khutubah. What khutubah is a promise of marriage. Prior to khutubah, absolute strangers, no commitment whatsoever. And you must deal with the other side just like you would deal with a foreigner, complete foreigner. After that, the khutubah, engagement period, both still remain foreign to each other. No physical contact, no expression of love or emotion is allowed. Only that which keeps the other side aware of your interest. That just general ta'aruf. And it should be limited because many people, they allow it to go too far where they exchange numbers, messaging anytime, calling anytime. And again, the first people to be hurt by this are both sides, the guy and the girl themselves. So it's very, very prudent and smart to keep fatrat al-khutubah, the engagement period, very short. And then after that, some people do a katb kitab period. After katb kitab in our sharia, it's marriage. But culturally speaking, some people, they wait to consummate the marriage after zifaf and hafl al-urs and stuff like that. That's a cultural standpoint. But as long as we're foreigners, we should try to limit the interaction as best as possible. But enough to address the brother's question, for us to get to know each other, to make sure that there is ballpark compatibility. And this is important to consider, because like we said, there's no one person that you could say, okay, this person has to be written for me. I have to know the ins and outs before I say okay. No, that's not the way it works. If there's ballpark compatibility, then we build a life with each other. That's what our Deen teaches. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. The same person had another question, which is, what is the role of wives, husbands in Islam? What rights does one have over the other? And before I allow the Sheikh to answer that, I'll plug another one of the events but one of the ongoing podcasts that the Sheikh is a part of. I believe it's every Tuesday, correct? It's called The Meeting Point with Shaykh Osamah, Brother Zayd Abbasi, Sheikh Yasser. This most recent episode actually featured Brother Mustafa Abbasi. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to bring people from the community to kind of address the points and the questions and the concerns, thoughts of actual community members and have that dialogue and interaction. So the most recent podcast they had quite literally hit the nail on the head when it came to it was concerning the roles of wives, husbands, also in shedding light on the role of the husband in the post the COVID era with working from home and whatnot. So I definitely recommend you listen to that. It's on the YouTube channel, and also they have it on Apple, the podcast, and all the podcasting services. I'll take one last question for now for social interaction, and then we'll move on to the next ones. How can you vent about your personal life or work life to family and friends without it being categorized as backbiting? So a person wants to vent and I guess unload some of the stress that they're going through. It may be interactions they're having at work or other things. So they want to vent to somebody they trust. How do they do this without it being categorized as backbiting?
How can you vent about your personal life or work life?
To family and friends.
I would urge the questioner, like, what do you mean by personal life? Do you mean like with your direct family, like your spouse, vent to other family members about that? That would be a very bad idea. But if you're talking about in general, and the reason why that would be a bad idea, and unfortunately I wanted to say that because some people don't realize that perhaps they might ruin their marriage with their own hands when they involve external forces within the families on both sides in their conflicts. The best thing you could possibly do if you need to talk to someone about a problem with your spouse is to involve a third party that's impartial. But once, for example, a wife complains to mother, father, my husband's doing X, Y, Z, or husband complains to mother, father as well, then this is like asking for a lot of conflict and heartache in a marriage. Wallahu a'lam. But now, if we were to extend that personal life and work life, how to vent about it without it being considered riba, backbiting. Well, the way that you do that is first consider who you're talking to. Don't make it just about venting. Don't make it just about venting. If you're really searching for answers, then make sure you go to someone who could give you answers. If you're searching for advice, go to someone who could give you advice. It could be a family member, maybe perhaps, that you think might be able to share with you some insights on how to deal with certain things. But if it just becomes venting for the sake of venting, and I'm mentioning, oh, Fulan is doing this, and Fulana did this, and this, and that, then it's basically riba. The other thing I could do is to try to remove the shakhs from the question or from the discussion. I'm not going to say Fulan or Fulana is not doing this, and that. I could say, what do I do if someone asked me, how do I handle this type of situation? What would you say? Make it in the third person, not about you necessarily. And again, this is all so that you could take away from the identity of the person you're speaking about. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakallah khair. I'll squeeze in one final social one just because she asked, she was one of the first ones to ask. She says, لو سمحت وجه كلمة لبناتنا عن البعد عن أصدقاء السوء. She's asking, please address a word to our daughters on staying away from bad friends or misguided friends.
Yeah, I think we can wajjah this type of kalma to the daughters and the sons as well, because this is a really important issue. Jazakumullah khair for asking. Really, my associates, whoever I associate with, have a real deep impact on who I become as a person. And we mentioned in previous durus and khawatir how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions this. He says, al-akhlaqu mu'diya. Character is contagious. He says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ittaqullaha wa kunu ma'as sadiqeen. Have taqwa and be with those who are truthful. Not just kunu minas sadiqeen, be from the truthful, because being truthful by yourself is not enough. If I'm used to hearing lies, if I'm used to hearing curse words, if I'm used to, hearing people, speak about erroneous subjects that, really push me away from Allah, then what can I expect? Who will I become as a person? If everything I hear is so obscene, this word, F word, B word, مش عارفة, it's going to be easy on my tongue. I'm not going to get fazed by it when I hear it. If my associates are constantly lying, then lying to their friends, to their family, it's going to be easy for me to lie. We tell this to parents too. Make sure if you want your son to be truthful, don't teach your son to lie. Don't teach your daughter to lie. That when they, to teach them how to speak mistruths, or to take, get out of getting in trouble, or something like that. So this is definitely, fundamental in our Deen. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakallah khair. Next question, Salam, because Ramadan is coming soon, inshallah. How many days will Taraweeh be here, inshallah, or is it all of Ramadan? Taraweeh will be all of Ramadan. I believe the first night of Taraweeh is going to be Friday, April 1st. The first day of Ramadan is April 2nd.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. Taraweeh is every day, inshallah. And inshallah, we're hopeful to having a normal Ramadan, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. We can fill the masjid, no social distancing. We'll have our i'tikafs, our suhoors, and so on and so forth, our evening programs, just like we used to have before COVID. Hopefully things stay like they are now. They're getting a lot better. And we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues to protect us, Ya Rabbi.
I'll keep the financial ones a little bit later, just because I know once one question is answered, it's going to bring about a lot more questions, so we'll stick on it towards the end. How do you reply when somebody asks, how should we love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and yet fear Him both at the same time?
How would I reply? Bismillah. So, the thing about love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is it's balanced between kamal al-hubb ma'a kamal al-dhul. They say it's the utmost level of love and devotion along with the utmost level of humility. Why? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us this. اعلموا أن الله شديد العقاب وأن الله غفور رحيم. Know that Allah is severe in punishment and consequence, and know that He is forgiving and merciful. When true love is love that's not just based in, I guess you could say, connection, just a connection with a person. It's also based in commitment. It's based in recognition of His azamah and His greatness. That's why the love for Allah is special. I fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because He has sifat al-jalal. He has the attributes of His might. That He is subhanah al-qawi, the powerful. He is dhul jalali wal ikram. He's the one who has utmost reverence and regard, and He's al-adl, the just. And if I was to do something that was to go against justice, then His wrath would come my way, because He is al-adl. So that's how I would explain the love of Allah. Between sifat al-jamal, the attributes of beauty, like Ghafoor, Rahim, forgiving, merciful, and sifat al-jalal, like al-qawi, al-aziz, the strong, the mighty, and so on and so forth. So they balance each other out, wallahu alam.
Jazakallah khair. This question is, do you have to memorize the Quran to be a sheikh? So obviously the person wants to be a student of knowledge, let's assume that. Do you necessarily have to memorize the Quran to become a sheikh, or somebody who's trusted in their knowledge of the Deen?
Bismillah. So sheikh linguistically means an elder, an old person, right? As they say in the Quran, وَأَبُونَا شَيْخٌ كَبِيرٌ. Our father is a Shaykh Kabir, he's an old man. And the reason why Shaykh was used to describe a learned person is because old age is supposed to give a person a level of wisdom, because that person has a lot of experience. Just as ilm, and especially ilm of Deen and Sharia, ilm of the Quran, is supposed to give a person wisdom because of wahi, revelation, because of the guidance of revelation. So that's why the word shaykh is used for that. So in essence, basically, the word shaykh is used to describe hikmah and wisdom. And ilm is supposed to give you, not necessarily, but it's supposed to give you hikmah, it's supposed to give you wisdom. You might find someone who has a lot of information, but has absolutely no hikmah at all. So, but anyway, the reason why I'm explaining this is there's no, status that would make, you're a sheikh now. Okay, yesterday you weren't a sheikh, today you're a sheikh. No, it's not a clearly defined type of thing. Yeah, imam is used for imam masjid, that's like a job title, if you want to say, imam al-masjid. Sheikh is this more general term. So what I'm basically trying to say is, to be a learned person in our deen, it's not essential that you have the Quran memorized. That's why I would rather use learned person as opposed to sheikh, because sheikh is a very general term. To be a learned person in our deen, you might have a strength in fiqh, a strength in hadith, a strength in kada, but you might not necessarily have the Quran memorized. Even though historically, usually, what they would start with is Quran and Lugha Arabiya. That would be the beginning path of a person who's seeking knowledge. And that's why you would always find, historically, that someone who is bari' fi ulum al-sharia usually would have the Quran memorized, because that's the beginning of the path. Yeah.
Jazakallah khair. This is a fiqhi question coming from a sister. She's asking, I've heard that there is no evidence that not fasting from pregnancy and breastfeeding was made up later by the wives of the Sahaba and the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, especially as they had many kids. If they were making up 10 or more months, assuming they had 5 pregnancies and so 5 breastfeeding, it would have been recorded. So they want to know the fiqhi opinion on the matter. Does a woman, just because they're having children and then having to breastfeed, are they responsible for making up all the times they were not fasting?
Wait, so the question is about a woman making up the fast, or is it about a woman who's in menstruation fasting?
No, sorry. It's about not fasting. Not fasting.
As makeup?
Okay. So they want to know, not fasting from pregnancy and breastfeeding was made up later by the wives of the Sahaba and the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
Yeah,
so yeah, she's saying that it was made up, but she wants to know if this is, that it wasn't recorded, and she wants to know your opinion on the matter, or the fiqhi opinion.
So Bismillah, in terms of the woman who is breastfeeding and the al-hamil al-murdi', does the hamil, the pregnant woman, and the breastfeeding woman have an excuse to break her fast? In many cases, yes. Not in all cases, because basically, the way the scholars deal with this situation is case by case. You might find a woman who's pregnant, who's very strong, who can fast and it won't affect her pregnancy at all. Or maybe perhaps based on the stage of the pregnancy. If it's in the beginning or the middle and end, or the end, it might be different, right? So not all women are the same. Some women fast while they're pregnant and it doesn't affect them. Many other women, they might find it extremely difficult to fast while they're pregnant because of the pain, the exhaustion, the dehydration, the kada. And if a doctor tells them that what you're going through is not good for your pregnancy, a trustworthy, reliable doctor tells them that they shouldn't fast, then they have an excuse not to fast. That's okay. The same thing with breastfeeding. For many women, breastfeeding, if they breastfeed, they're not able to fast. Because if they were to fast, then the dehydration would cause them to lose their milk supply. Now, they have a udhr in those types of situations. So now, do they have to make those days up? According to all 4 schools, they do have to make those days up. Now, of course, we're coming hundreds of years later. I don't make up opinions for you, right? We have our Sharia has already been established over 1,000 years ago. All 4 madhahib, they say that the woman who has makeup days, she has to make up those days. There's not a single madhab that says that you could just pay fidya and that's it. There's opinions outside of the four schools today, that there's a few opinions. It's a very small fringe minority that say that you don't have to make up the days. And you could just give fidya instead of each day, khalas. The reasoning behind the scholars who say that you have to make up the days is basically al-hamil is given hukum al-marid, the ruling of the sick person. Because of her physical body's condition, she can't fast. Just as, like, for example, if you were to start off a day of fasting and you're going to get an excruciating migraine that like disables you. You cannot do anything. I can't function, and it might even blur my vision. It gets so bad. Is it okay for me to break my fast in the middle of the day if I feel like I can't go on anymore? Yeah, you could do that. And you'll just have to make it up later on. So just as that type of person who has, it doesn't have a chronic illness, it's not marad muzmin, it's a temporary illness, this person has to make it up. The same way, because of her physical body's condition, she can't fast, she'll have to make it up later on. This is the madhahib al-arba'a. In fact, among those madhahib, the Shafi'i school actually has even more detail. I don't want to confuse it, but in some situations, the Shafi'i school says that if she broke her fast, not due to something physical for her, it was only للخوف على الجنين, for nothing else. خوفا على الجنين. The doctor says that it'll make your pregnancy in danger. I'm okay, I don't feel anything wrong with me, but the doctor's telling me my pregnancy might be in danger. Then we'll say, make up the days and give fidya. But to just give fidya, khalas, I'm going to pay $10, wallahi, it's a really good deal. Wallahi, just pay $10 and just pay $300 and you wipe out a full month of siyam. Wow, that's pretty cool. It's not to say that it's not hard to make up those days. It is. But I have al-umr, al-tawil. No one's saying you have to fast months on end to make up those days. This qada is ala tarahi. You have time to make up those fasts, wallahu alam.
I'll tie two questions together for the sake of time. So the first one is asking if you've done something bad earlier in your life in the past, how can you make it up for it in a religious way? And then along the same lines, somebody's asking if you, and this is coming from somebody who's young. He's saying they're 12 years old, or she. If you don't pray at all, if you don't pray all the prayers on time, do you still go to heaven? And how can you start praying more and more on time?
Allah yakramak wa yajzik al-khair. Actually, I don't know if it's a boy or a girl, but may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you immensely for thinking like this. We should all think like this. How can we, because salah is a debt to Allah. And the hadith tells us, Daynullah ahaqqu bil qada'. That the debt of Allah is most due, most worthy of being repaid. Right? So it's good to think, what are my rights to Allah and what are my rights to people? And how can I fulfill both? Now, my advice to you now is forget about the past since you're so young. And now, once you hit what we call bulugh, reaching the age of accountability, and that happens by certain ways, you're going to be accountable for every salah you miss. So forget about the past now, and now with the coming days, try your best not to miss any more prayers. If you are older, like 16, 17, 20, I tell you, what you'd have to do is estimate. Estimate how many prayers you have to make up. Is it 10, 20? Is it 50? Maybe perhaps 10, maybe 10 of each, 10 fajrs, 10 kada, dhuhrs or asr. You have to estimate. And then slowly try to make it up. Instead of praying sunan, pray the fard instead. So every time you pray dhuhr, pray another dhuhr with it. Every time you pray a fajr, pray another fajr with it as qada. If you are older, I would tell you this advice.
So along those lines, the person I guess wants to know the exact moment, the exact period of time from which they should start calculating. They're saying what's the age or the year that you start being accountable.
So for females, it's when the monthly cycle starts. For males, it's when you have a nocturnal emission. If you don't know what that means, go ask your parents. If you don't have a nocturnal emission, then it's when you hit the age of 15. Wallahu alam.
All right, one more question.
Usually for most boys, it's around the age of 13 or 14. It's around that age.
What would you say about somebody who says, I love my dad more than I love the Prophet ﷺ?
I would say learn more about the Prophet ﷺ. I think you love your dad so much because you see what your father does for you and how he sacrifices for you and how he talks with you. But if you were to learn about Rasulullah ﷺ, you would start loving him a lot more too. That would be my advice for you. How can I love the Prophet if I know nothing about him? How can I love the Prophet if I hardly remember him? These are things that we all need. Wallahu a'lam.
Final question before we switch over to the financial questions. Can you please explain the ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah where Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam went for 40 nights? What is the point of that? And is that the same thing that of which the Jews and the Christians refer to as when God sent down the 10 Commandments?
Why did he go from for 40 nights? The ayah says, وَإِذْ وَعَدْنَا مُوسَى 40 لَيْلَةً. He went for 40 nights because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him to. Why did Allah tell him to? Allahu a'lam. Maybe you might find in the books of tafsir some explanation. But in general, the verse tells us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set 40 nights as his meeting point, as his meeting time with Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam. I don't really have much more to say offhand besides that, but we could go back to the books of tafsir and try to find more explanation. Allahu a'lam.
Bismillah. What are your thoughts on Islamic mortgage companies such as Guidance Residential?
Bismillah. So about mortgages, it's one of those really complicated things in our current reality. And it's become less complicated, or maybe more complicated. I guess it depends on how you look at it. But historically speaking, there's an old fatwa before there used to be any Islamic mortgage companies. You're talking about a few decades ago. Before there was any Islamic mortgage companies, the fatwa was that you should not get a mortgage, a house, unless there is a need. And then they go out explaining what that need is. Like perhaps if you have children and it's difficult to rent. Perhaps if renting is at a very high cost and it might cause you to suffer a great deal of financial losses, whereas getting a mortgage because it's for an extended period of time will end up being a lot cheaper. That's what it was historically. But when Islamic mortgage companies came up, now the ruling became that it's no longer allowed to go to a conventional mortgage because it's direct riba, it's riba sarih. There's explicit interest in that type of transaction, and that's what would make the transaction prohibited. This is the opinion of mainstream scholars. Most scholars, they say that what you have to do is try to follow the path that has least hurma and prohibition in it. At least I try to do something about it. Now, the question becomes, are Islamic mortgage companies a good alternative? Many people would argue this point, that they change the names of things and it's essentially the same thing. That they are exploitative because they require certain high down payments and they want certain high profit percentages and so on and so forth, and that might be true, but now I'm between a situation where go to riba sarih or go to an attempt to find a solution. Why is it so difficult to find a solution? Is it just that they're bad people, quote unquote? No, I'm not saying that. Those aren't my words. Islamic mortgage companies, do they just want to exploit people? Not necessarily. The reason is because it's regulated by the finance industry. They can't just do whatever. A bank can't do whatever it wants in terms of the way it transacts. There are certain regulations that don't allow banks to buy and sell in assets. They have to buy and sell in what? Debt. And of course, by us, debt is and loans, they're not profitable ventures. You can't profit off of a loan. That's what riba is all about. So because there are strict regulations, there are a lot of limitations in what an Islamic alternative can look like. But there needs to be a lot more work done to try to pressure Islamic mortgage companies to try to be more fair in terms of the market. If you know that there's a large pool of the population that will only go to you, and there are only a few companies that they could choose from, then of course they're all gonna seek their interest, their financial interest. But a lot of work needs to be done. But in general, the fatwa now is don't get a conventional mortgage, even though it's it puts you at a disadvantage. Most scholars, they say this. There are a few scholars who say otherwise, and with great respect and regard to them, still the fatwa of most scholars in America is to choose one of the Islamic mortgage options. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakallah khair. This question is basically, the person's asking, let's say I pay zakat properly, and from time to time I do make donations, but I avoid paying proper taxes. What is the Islamic view on that? So basically what's between him and Allah, he's taken care of. What's between him and Uncle Sam, he's avoiding. So what is the Islamic view on that?
So basically the question is, what's the Islamic view of cheating the government out of taxes?
Yeah, but the caveat is that you are paying zakah and donating from time to time.
What does zakah have to do with taxes?
They're making themselves bari. I don't.
So look, if we were in an Islamic system, would we have this idea of taxes? Does Islam have an idea of taxation? No, it doesn't have an idea of taxation. We have the system of zakat. That's what we have. But now that we're in this country and we chose to be in this country and we've accepted to be in this country, there are certain laws that we have to abide by. If we don't, then I put myself in great haraj. Too many Muslims have been, I guess, held liable for tax fraud. Should I really create that type of image for my deen? Some people have this weird, bizarre misconception. As long as I'm dealing with an entity that's not Muslim or people who aren't Muslims, I could exploit them as much as I want. If I could find find a way to get money that I'm not undeserving of, like I'll go get welfare or the government support or something like that, and I know that I might be driving a Mercedes and the only reason I'm getting this is because I'm getting cash money. I'm getting cash money. It's not on the record books. Is this type of money halal? If I take it from, this is mal ma'khudh bighayr wajh haqq. This is mal haram. Even if it's coming from a source, whatever that source might be, I can't take, regardless of who other people are or what other people are about, I can't take something that I'm undeserving of, government assistance, if I don't really deserve it. That's going to be mal haram. Now about taxation, I have to follow the law of the land. What am I going to do? Am I going to put myself in a situation where I'm disgracing my deen because I'm trying to, cheat Uncle Sam out of money? You can't do that. Wallahu alam.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. Is it permissible to invest in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, the fatwa that they have is that investing in Bitcoin is halal but makruh. Makruh, offensive, and the reason why that it's makruh is because it's a very volatile market. It goes up and down very quickly, very easily. It's unstable, and because of its instability, it makes it have some gharar and ambiguity in it, and undue risk-taking in its transactions, and it also can be likened to qimar and gambling in a sense. So it's not haram because it's not gambling, it's halal, but it's makruh, it's disliked because of the great volatility that it has. That's the summary of the fatwa. There's many research papers written about it, but this is the opinion that I know to be held by a bunch of fatwa houses. Wallahu alam.
If you are a pious man or woman and if you have strong iman and taqwa, but at the same time you're in debt, will the Prophet ﷺ dislike you? Because my Islamic teacher, maybe Islamic studies teacher, told me that the Prophet ﷺ would never be at the janazah of those who died while in debt.
Look, I wouldn't say it in those words, but I would say it like this. Look, Islam frowns upon debt. It teaches us to try to avoid debt as much as we can. There's a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says, لأن يأخذ أحدكم حزمة فيحتطب حطبا. If someone was to take a pile of wood and buy and sell that pile of wood, buy and sell with wood, it's better than them to ask people. خير له من أن يسأل الناس أعطوه أو منعوه. Whether they give him or deny him. Living in debt is not a good thing. It actually causes people a lot of stress and anxiety, and it causes a lot of people to fall into great financial hardship. And unfortunately, this is the mode of living for many people in our country. It's hard to find someone who has money but isn't living beyond their standard of living. They're living a life of debt. There's the Prophet ﷺ, there's other hadith that frown upon debt. That one other hadith is that the Prophet ﷺ says the individual is shackled by his debt in his grave. Even the shaheed. Every يغفر للشهيد كل ذنب إلا الدين, except debt that could have been repaid and wasn't repaid. So it's a serious thing to have debt, and this is how I should understand it. Now, if the person has debts and wants to repay them, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help them in doing that. من أخذ أموال الناس يريد أداءها أدى الله عنه. Allah will help that person in doing that. If the person's trying everything they can to get out of debt, but is in debt, the Prophet won't dislike them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware of the people, and we should try our best to just not live in debt. Wallahu a'lam. Yeah, khalas, just leave it for another time.
This is a fiqh question. The person is asking, after I use the bathroom, clean myself properly, and make wudu, sometimes it feels like drops of urine would leave my body when I make ruku' or sujud. What should I do? It gives me doubts if I had broken my wudu or not while he or she are in the prayer.
Yeah, just know that al-yaqeen la yazul bil-shak. That certainty will not go away just because of doubts. Meaning, I've made wudu and I'm certain about that. The only thing that will take away my doubt of my wudu is something else that is absolutely certain. Feeling droplets or something, it could be water, remnants of water, it could be anything else, it could be some moisture that was there, sweat or whatever it might be. Unless I'm 100% certain that it's urine, then I don't need to worry about it at all. I should just leave it, and if I find myself that I have a waswasa, disregard it. Don't pay any attention to that waswasa. Wallahu alam. More than likely, it's not urine, unless you have a medical problem. If you have a medical problem, then you are from ashab al-a'dhar. You have a special ruling in Islamic law. Wallahu alam.
One more question. It's from the 12-year-old. She said she's a girl. She wants to know, why is it that we fast in Ramadan?
Why is it that we fast? So, Jazakallah khair, that could be answered in a lecture. Why do we fast? But for starters, the first reason we fast is because Allah told us to. And that's a good enough reason in itself. Istijabatan li amrillah. And that's what ibadah is centrally about. Al-ibadah lit-ta'abbud. Worship is to feel a sense of servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and commitment to Him. There's other reasons why we fast. The chief reason that they say is behind fasting is tahqiq al-ubudiyya lillah. What does tahqiq al-ubudiyya lillah means? One of the unique things about fasting is no one can see it. It's not something that you see with your eyes. That means that you could break your fast at any time and leave it completely hidden to everybody. No one's going to know about it. But one of the things that Ramadan teaches me to do is when Allah says stop eating, I stop eating. When He tells me to eat, I rush to eat. And that's why they say that ta'jeel al-fitr is from the sunan. It's sunnah to hasten to break your fast, because what? That's part of the sense of servitude to Allah. So that's the central reason why we fast, is because it gives me, if I become that person, I have I feel Allah's watchfulness over me. Because that's the only thing that's really going to make me start or stop my fast. Allah's watchfulness. Because I could easily get around people and avoid them in my fasting. And if I feel Allah's watchfulness over me, then I will no longer be a person of hawa and whims. I won't be driven by my shahawat and my desires. That's what Ramadan helps me do. Helps me control my shahwa and my desires. Puts me in control instead of what I want, being in control.
Jazakallah khair. There's only 2 more questions, so we're doing great with getting through them.
Do them in
one of them, I'm just going to say this just so they don't think we skipped their question. It's a very technical question regarding the Muslim mortgage companies. So if you have that question, maybe it would be better suited if you ask the Sheikh, just because there's a lot of technicalities that go into that. The final question basically is asking, so they understand your stance and your explanation on the answer you gave regarding like Guidance Residential and other Islamic mortgage companies. But they're saying, what if, you know, an Islamic mortgage company is just not available wherever they're located? Can they then take out a conventional mortgage?
If an Islamic mortgage company is not available wherever they're located,
Correct.
They're definitely not in New Jersey. I'm guessing this is coming from another state, because if they're in New Jersey, they're definitely available in the state. But if suppose that is the case, then we would go back to the default. Is there a real need for it or not? That depends on my circumstance. If I can afford comfortably renting, then that's the better and safer thing for you to do. But if I can't rent, if I have 4 kids, 5 kids, I won't find anyone to rent out to me, for example, then you can consider getting a conventional mortgage if it's your only option. Wallahu a'lam.
I think we can wrap up this portion of the night here, unless anybody has a question they'd like to ask in person, because we're through with the questions that were texted. Does anyone have a question to ask? All right, Jazakallah khair.
جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. العصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Inshallah, for the coming community hubs, we have some guests lined up in the month of March. Next week we have a guest coming with us, and inshallah we'll announce his subject very soon. He's coming from out of state. And we also have others as well. 3 of the 4 weeks we're going to have guest speakers, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. There's the snacks on the right and on the left for the brothers and for the sisters. And I think, Na'il, you want to make an announcement? Just one quick announcement with Brother Na'il, and we're done, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair. This is the time for the social aspect of the night. So inshallah we'll have the sisters can go downstairs. There's ping pong tables, and you can socialize there inshallah. And the brothers can stay upstairs. And like the Sheikh said, please help yourself to some refreshments. Jazakallah khair for coming tonight.